What's up, guys? It's Bromley from Empire Barbell, and today we're going to do something different. I'm coming to you from my truck where I decided to hide today because my wife is working from home and she's an APS supervisor for the county and has to be part of 4 Skype meetings a day with her coworkers and her boss. And I decided that if I had to hear her boss's voice anymore in my living room, that I was going to lose it. So I decided to find shelter in my truck, and I figured I might as well be productive and make a video while I'm at it. For those of you that have complained about production quality in the past, I currently have my cell phone taped to my steering wheel, and that's how we're going to do things today. So I decided to compile some of the comments and some of the questions I've gotten in the comments section over the last few weeks or so. In fact, one of the cool things about the channel growing the way it's grown is the ability I have to interact with a lot of people, answer a lot of questions. It's really engaging, and I really appreciate that about all of this. So I'm going to go down some of the questions I've gotten and answer. This is no particular theme. These are just some of the more interesting questions that I haven't made a video about or I might get to in the future, but are worth addressing right now. So let's start out. Sean Davis left a comment. He said, "Hey, Alex, I love your breakdown of Prilipin's chart. I'm a nerd first and a powerlifter second, and I love to look at the research and try to understand things more deeply. I'm curious what your opinion on this research coming out that suggests maximize muscle protein synthesis. You need 25 stimulating reps per muscle group per workout. Chris Beardsley at Strength and Conditioning Research has written a ton of articles on this subject. The idea is only the last 5 reps of a set to failure are stimulating. If I'm understanding correctly, ideally all 5 are RP9 and you're stopping right before you hit RP10. So theoretically, any rep range is the same for hypertrophy or for strength. What matters is that you always keep at a certain level of intensity so that you're neither overtraining or undertraining, and your body will always continue to grow. Not linearly, of course, which is where periodization comes into play. Is this oversimplifying training for powerlifters?" So there's a lot of things to unpack here. In my response, I put this in the comments section. I'll just read it as I wrote it and talk a little bit after that. It's not a new idea. Mentor-esque high-intensity training, that's Mentor-esque is high-intensity training that only really focuses on one set, but it's taken to the absolute brink. It's taken to failure and even beyond using things like forced reps and drop sets. Idea being that level of effort that you put out is really what drives growth. Mentor-esque high-intensity training was formed around the idea that the only valuable reps were the ones after fatigue sets in, taking so far as to say that volume overall didn't matter. I've talked to other world-class guys who believe similarly that the reps closest to the end of the set were the real growth reps, though some came to the conclusion that the more growth reps you had, the better, and countered the typical high-intensity principles with multiple sets of high rep work to maximize the number of growth reps. I struggle with giving credit to any study that tries to make broad universal recommendations like that. Studies are only as good as their limitations and their ability to control for error. The one limitation that exercise science studies will never be able to eliminate are individual differences in response, along with how those responses change over time when returns diminish. Remember, what works for you at one point eventually becomes the very thing that you adapted to, so your body doesn't have a reason to adapt further. So I've actually talked to coaches who think that your body will adapt to the point of the same type of progression will stop yielding returns, to the point where you even have to get tricky with the mode you use to progress. So that creates a level of variability for what is optimal that requires a bigger pool of subjects to test than any of these programs will ever have access to. And that's one of the reasons why you get so much discrepancy, so many differences in what turns out to be effective training protocols, because you have a big talent of people that actually compete, bodybuilding, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, and so on, which is why we have schools of thought that fundamentally differ from each other. We have in bodybuilding something like Mensah on one end, who is just going balls out on one set. We have on the other end the more typical type of bodybuilding training that is very high volume and seeks to consistently improve the amount of workload you do at those higher rep thresholds. And the same is true for powerlifting. You show me 10 guys that hold a position on a top 10 all-time list, and I'll show you 20 different methods that were used at some point in all of their careers to continuously spur growth. I mean, there isn't one method that just works for one person along their entire training career, and there certainly isn't one method that applies to everybody. So there's a lot of variability that has to be taken into account, and these studies are never going to quite get there. So I always kind of roll my eyes when we get to that point where we find this breakthrough because a study found some correlation. That's a piece of the puzzle. That's one thing that you want to be able to apply to a greater canvas And it's just another tool in your belt, something that you can use at one point to know that you're doing enough work to continuously progress at whatever program you're in. So I continue. It also feeds into the idea that there is some optimal metric you should be following right now, and perpetuates the myopic approach of looking at the workout instead of the entire training block. And that's the issue I take with these studies and the people that really dig in and try to extrapolate too much from one study, because the studies always use, it's one training metric that they're comparing, it's one variable that they're comparing, and it's always outside of the realm of how does the structure change over time, because that's ultimately what's going to lead to long-term growth. It's not about the workout or what you do right now. It's about the change that happens over a long period of time. So I don't like the fact that people read studies and they think they can extrapolate, well, this is the thing you need in your training. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. There's no magic amount of volume or intensity in any one session, because it is not the session, but the change in demand of sessions over time that creates growth. What is vitally important, which such a study can't speak to, is how you actually use such a principle to progress from today's workout to the next one, because without that, no one continues to grow past that point of stagnation. So again, reading studies, it's helpful. It'll help give you some insight that you haven't considered before. It'll give you some insight into the mechanisms that cause growth, but there's a lot of different factors, and you can hyper focus on any one at any particular point in your training and see growth. You can blend them, you can wave back and forth. Okay, there's no right answer. Getting the most out of any approach or method of training is a matter of digging into it, finding what that method's capacity to cause you to grow is, and how much variability. I encourage you guys, once you've started something, if it's no longer satisfactory, don't ditch it and do something drastically different. I actually encourage everybody to make small changes. Find out what the minimum amount of change you can make to any one template is that causes you to grow. It might be tweaking the frequency. It might be tweaking the percentages down or up. It might be using subtly different variations of the exercise. There's a lot of changes you can make. And once you find what that minimum change was that got you to continue progressing, you are going to have an infinitely better idea of how to manage any training program, as opposed to, finding the golden egg is like this one method or this one piece of information I got from this one study. That's it. That's the thing. It's how you apply it. Okay, it's how seriously you take it. It's how much you pay attention to how you respond to every single thing you're doing in training over a long period of time. Okay, so don't get too hyper fixated on those individual bits of information that come out of academic studies.